What is a Soylennial? What is the consensus generation? This is a question that has been plaguing our online and in real life experiences for the last, say, 10 years, maybe slightly more, where there's been a gradual decline in the masculinity of both the men in society and then society in general. There's been this defeatist acceptance toward a feminized version of a egalitarian society, and alongside this you have the champions of such decline who are able to elevate their station in such a type of society. And what do I mean by this? So, as you can see here, I've compiled a collage of Soylennials. These are men, typically millennials, but it could also be slightly more younger Gen X or slightly older Gen Zs who have this certain effete and pathetic demeanor and aura. They have what is an acceptance of life in its dismal qualities, and then you should just be nice, you should be a kind person. It's this Redditor physiognomy, and this is what we'll go through. So it could be anything, and usually is this beard to offset the balding, the Norwood 2 or 3, it's over. Otherwise, it's this perennial looking 25 with no testosterone at all to be flowing through the blood. And so what you do get is a fairly good alignment, and in our morphological terms, a unity of a man. It's this idea of a Soylennial is this, and you can see here, as I said, a soy jack or some derivation caricature, which actually strikes true. You can stereotype it to the degree that every time you see someone like that, you know their political beliefs, you know what culture they're into, what type of political stance they have in a social sphere and an economic sphere, and in the arts and sciences. Everything is always consensus driven. You have what is basically a focus group as a generation. How do I gain the respect of everyone around me? It's to hold the opinion that they all hold. And so when you do that, when you have such a high monolithic belief on certain allowed and unallowed ideas, then you just get a simulacra of a man, and not a real man, but something that represents what a man would look like if he had to design himself without the idea of what being masculine and being a man is. You have completely pathetic, and this one looks like he's being sodomized by Jordan Peterson and Nigel Farage here, which is a very strange choice for a thumbnail. And you also have this attempt at being a tough guy, being a burly or brusque or something where there's some threat or intimidation of risk, and this is eating hot sauces for clicks, for views. And I think there's very few excuses for this other than to say this and is a generation that has not had to suffer. And so when you have a lack of suffering, you have a lack of privation, of deprivation, of any notion of what it means to be in pain properly. And this is psychosomatic or psychic pain rather than necessarily physical. I think everyone still goes through physical pain, but a prolonged absence of suffering does engender in an entire generation this feeling where all you get as outcomes or actions are pandering. It's this inclusiveness above all. It's trying to be unoffensive because it could possibly generate some sort of conflict. You have what are the most mawkish people alive, and mawkish for things they never experienced in the most bizarre and perplexing ways, which is to say, it's not as if they're yearning for a time, say 200, 300 more romantic years ago. They're yearning for the time like the 70s or the 80s, where it was identical for all intents and purposes, other than some superficial differences in cultural products, like songs were slightly different or movies were slightly different, but the whole ethos of the era was the same, indistinguishable from a macro scope of analyzation of time. So it's very peculiar how mawkish everybody is. And then this enables just a level of meek or feebleness, which you can see here, where the effect emotionally on them by things which are very undignified and ignoble is allowing them to render what is I want to say a childlike, but definitely a adolescent response. So I think in diagnosing this, maybe we can offer some prognosis. I think if you look at testosterone levels, millennials and now probably Gen Z are some of the worst offenders for having low testosterone. This correlates quite strongly with obesity, so overweight, but also different types of estrogenic chemicals, you could say toxins, anything where you feel as if microplastics have been having a deleterious effect on your body, on your physique, then you can consider the generation of millennials to be at the forefront of this. Consuming soy shakes, making sure that they're using plastic everything all the time, all their clothes are plastic, everything they do and eat and interacts with has touched plastic to a degree, and not to mention any of the other products which might have other toxic chemicals for your endocrine system. Another manifesting way in which we can see this come borne out is just very simply the top 10 Reddit threads, because Reddit has encapsulated this entire idea of a Soylennial. Anything you might get that's positive out of Reddit, for the declaration or disclaimer here, I actually have been on Reddit, so I can not hopefully call myself a Redditor, but I do know what it is, and I do occasionally visit it for certain things. But if you look at the most popular subreddits, which I definitely do not maintain a presence on, you can see that it's just very basic normie tier trash. And now this is not to badmouth normies in particular here, but the Soylennial normie is a very particular version of this, and there's an enforcement of a certain political and social leaning, and you must be in line, otherwise you will get what their version of violence is, which is usually a ban or a down vote. So the complete soyification, we could call it, of a generation is basically simulated in what is Reddit. And so you can gather that if you have met someone who is a Redditor by the designation, then you know what type of person you're probably getting, and that person is probably not someone who will amount to anything in any important way, but is still, I would say, plaguing a lot of the modern discourse and environment that surrounds us. It's to say, when you are swimming amongst a sea of normies, then you still want them to be like a school of fish headed in the right direction, rather than necessarily going in the adverse direction for where you want society to go. The sway of the middle is an important political understanding that in any society, say the middle 80% will never pull in any direction. They will be pulled. So if you have strong forces outside of these pulling them in certain cultural or social ways, then you'll get them to follow in suit. This is what you can see throughout the many centuries of Western society. And you can see, I think X here is probably quite a good reverse lens for this, where you can see the diagnosis of a Soylennial through usually popular culture and news articles, things like this. And you can see how the usage of language becomes very particular when you encounter Soylennial, where you have these very puerile and also embarrassingly inane pejoratives and imprecations. So something like a nepo piss baby, or using the word fuck as if it was some outrageously offensive tool, and combining it in creative ways to make it seem like it's somehow more insulting, rather than, I think, communicating what is frustration or anger. It's always a challenge to one-upmanship of how creatively insulting you can be to be funny. And so you'll see this a lot. And I think the panacea to such a anathema, or to the illness here, is to both hit the gym. And so you can see here grip strength. Millennial men are pathetically weak. They are much weaker than just the previous generation, at about 20% weaker. And that's just from grip strength. And I can guarantee you things that also affect them are Posture, so you'll have a worsening of posture, skin conditions, balding is probably higher, DHT levels being unbalanced. You also have what is effectively a skinny fat physiognomy, physique, which is plaguing, once again, the entire generation of men who consume more carbohydrates without the correspondent activity level. Ray Peat had a lot of ideas around sugar and engagement, so sugar is not the enemy per se, and I think there's definitely some learnings to be had around diet that can improve an existing thyroid function or endocrine system. But in general, if you're just going to eat slop and seed oils and sit on your ass, then you will get this disgusting physique, as you can see here, epitomized by the streamer called Destiny, who is a champion, as you probably would understand, of the Reddit left, or the Reddit libtard, or whatever you want to designate it as. So I think from that degree, it's very easy to see there's very few people who are serious about their physical health in a way that's impressive and heroic, and then that they also have corresponding beliefs which transcend the current political system of left and right, because the Redditor is not just a left creature, it can also be this conservative. When you have a look at all of these rather embarrassingly, and I said before, caricatures of a man, that can also play out truly on the right, where you have what is Christian conservatives who speak a lot about tradition and having trad wives and all this embarrassing stuff, where you look at them and you're also embarrassed to be associated with them, and this is just a function of a Soylennial. It's the idea that being a contrarian is, artificially a contrarian, is enough to imbue you with a certain masculinity, energy, or something like that, vitality. But if you had proper vim and vigor for your own stance, you'd just pick something that doesn't necessarily have to be contrary. It just is the position that you hold. And this is what strong men of destiny and of history have done. They don't go and test the waters and pick which team they want to play on. They play for themselves, and people flock to them to participate, to cooperate, to collaborate. And so to avoid yourself being a Soylennial, to have that is possible, but you just have to make sure you're maintaining a certain level of masculine rigor around your life. It's discipline, it's gym attendance and nutrition, and it's also inculcating yourself in spheres of learning that build your character rather than conform you to what is the flock, the sheep effect. It's also probably especially true now in this internet age, because we have the crossover effect here of a declining testosterone as men age who are inactive. Testosterone and metabolism decline, and so you get this effect of a feminization of the man, and then you have a buildup of certain beliefs and knowledge. So you get a hubris around what they think is known, and known from a moral, ethical standpoint. You have a certain casuistry in this point, but an emboldened rectitude, where they'll take a stance and say, this is the one that I've built up. It's the democratic, neoliberal stance, and that's the right, moral, virtuous path to take. And then also enforcing it with my declining testosterone means that I'll use state apparatus. I'll use very effeminate ways of dealing with this. There's a natural shrink away from power when you're a feminized man, that it's quite scary to be confronted with something like violence for saying something or doing something. So they'll try and structure it in ways where the police state will take control. And this is, as I said, kind of synonymous with this generation. This is how they have learnt to govern, how they've learnt to interact with the system. I think finally then I would just say that whilst it is the most educated of generations so far, it's also the most unsagacious, you could say, but just the moronic. There's a lot of poor decision making because they've substituted wisdom for education. It's to say, I can understand and know things, and that's sufficient. I don't have to act, I don't have to make decisions, I don't have to learn things in the reality, in the actuality. There's this biocentric worldview that they're incapable of forming. They live quite literally in the space of symbols, in this irreality. So when you consume, when your life consumes you almost, then there is this reciprocal basis by which you're reinforcing your beliefs. So you go into things assuming that it'll be the same forever. And so when you have someone like Trump, for instance, disrupt this effect by coming in with something different, it quite literally harms your psyche, and you have this meltdown effect. And you'll notice this on internet forums most particularly, but also mainstream media and any other places you interact. This could be universities, it could be workplaces, that there's a huge mental breakdown from people who are women are on a side and quite a different creature when it comes to this, but particularly the Soylennial man will have this feminism, or they call it woke and they call it all of these things, but there's this disposition towards being a consensus creature. And once I say, if you can't encapsulate, you can't embody a biocentric worldview, then you're just left with a simulation effect of what is a reality. And that, unfortunately for them, it creates this creature that we see here today. And I sincerely hope that you try to avoid these pitfalls.